Television Academy. And I think that that was hard for him.
He continued to portray the ideal husband on television, but off-screen, Landon was growing apart from his real-life partner.
You know, as a child, you don't understand the dynamics that always go on between two adults, and especially with your own parents at times. And I really had no idea, you know, that anything was wrong.
But things at home were very wrong, and they got even worse when Michael met 18-year-old Cindy Clerico. She was working as a stand-in on the set, and Michael was quite simply thunderstruck.
Yeah, I had no clue, you know, I had no clue whatsoever. It was my first day on the set, and he said he looked through the camera, and there was just something about your way.
Michael's initial attraction to Cindy deepened into an even stronger emotional bond, and divorce from Lynn became inevitable.
It was terrible. It was awful. It's an absolute failure when people break up.
Well, we were married for 19 years. I mean, you can't, I mean, how many people are with a company for 19 years? I mean, 19 years is a long time. And just because people grow apart at that point in their lives, it doesn't mean that everything that preceded it was a failure.
With a fortune at stake, the Landon divorce turned into a nasty legal battle. Community property laws left Lynn with a multi-million-dollar settlement.
In a sense, our world was shattered at that point.
The issues of disillusionment and anger and the fear that takes place. I just think that those are the things that I experienced.
On Valentine's Day in 1983, Michael and Cindy were married in a simple ceremony at their home in Malibu. Their first child, Jennifer, was born later that same year, and Cindy gave birth to a second child, a son named Sean. Landon's public image was undeniably bruised, but his fans ultimately would turn out to be much more forgiving than his own family.
Thank heaven you're all right. What happened?
It's over. Everybody has to be out by Sunday afternoon.
Oh, no.
After 9 long years on the network's schedule, by 1983, Little House on the Prairie had finally run its course. The children had grown into young adults, and Landon was distracted with his new NBC show, the short-lived Father Murphy, starring his good friend Merlin Olsen. When it came time to close the book on Little House on the Prairie, Michael Landon made sure it went out with a bang.
I wanted to destroy the entire town, which I did. Everybody needed a catharsis on that show. We were together for 9 years, and that's why we blew it up. That plus the fact I didn't want anybody making a trashy movie in Walnut Grove, because I liked that town.
Everybody sort of said goodbye and wandered back up to the trailers to get changed, and Mike and I were left alone, and we were both just weeping uncontrollably, sitting on a log, and he said to me, he said, you know what, this is just the beginning for you. It's only the beginning, and it's going to be okay.
I sit down occasionally when one of these reruns comes on, and there's just something warm that happens inside of me. And I really, it makes me feel good because I remember how much I enjoyed getting up and going to work, to be on the set with Michael.
What do you say?
I think that's downright mean. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's.
I could go home and take my kids who were really quite young at the time and sit down and say, this is what your father does. There aren't a lot of shows on television that I would want to do that with today.
When Little House ended, Landon hoped to focus on his directing career. He was offered many potential projects, but was reportedly off-put by the blatant sexuality and violence. Once again, he took matters into his own hands, writing and directing a semi-autobiographical movie entitled Sam's son. For nearly a quarter century, everything Landon touched had turned to gold. But Sam's son was a different story. It tanked in theaters and failed to launch the full-time directing career he had envisioned.
I made a feature and it did zero in the theaters. It was a nice little movie and it did very well on television. You know, I was on 14 years on Bonanza and 9 years on Little House. I think an audience tends not to want to pay for something they get for nothing. I'm a television name and a very important name in television. And in order to be an important name in features at this point in time in my life, I'd have to be 30 years younger, and I'm not. I'm a 50-year-old man who is not going to become a superstar at this point in his life in films.
In 1984, Landon went back to the small screen with Highway to Heaven. At first, the show didn't have a prayer with the network.
Thanks.
NBC wanted something to compete with Dallas and Dynasty, shows which epitomized the raging materialism of the 1980s. Like Little House on the Prairie, Highway to Heaven was a reminder of a simpler time.
They're beautiful.
Oh, thank you. There's nothing like some flowers to brighten up a place.
Once again, Landon was the star of the series, though by now it was his least favorite occupation.
We're gonna do another single without cheating to look up some.
Michael enjoyed directing more than anything. He liked the creativity of directing and going on the set and working with the actors, working with the crew. He really enjoyed that.
And then we'll just continue on with it, bring him up.
He liked to write, but felt it was a very lonely profession. He liked acting the least, but he was smart enough to know that the actors get the money.
Landon had grown accustomed to taking complete control. He admitted that he had trouble sharing responsibility. But within the industry, there were rumors that Landon was too controlling, somewhat inflexible, and even abrasive.
I'm not abrasive. I have no reason to be abrasive. I'm very, very secure in what I do. I'm very good at what I do. You find people that are abrasive are people who are panicky because they're trying to put up a front, pretending they know what they're doing. And this town is loaded with them.
There's plenty for all! There's plenty for all!
Ed Asner found out firsthand what Landon was like to work with.
2 more minutes. Come on, let's go. Harold, you know how he feels about this.
Well, what's wrong with turning a little water into wine? I mean, it was perfectly acceptable.
Now, that was for an entirely different reason, and you know it. I want you to turn it off. Come on, turn it off.
He was the man in charge, and it was the swiftest shooting in episodic television at the time, I believe, because of his expertise. You got the feeling that with this rapidity with which he shot, and with the way his crew worked and the actors responded, that there was very little opposition and that he would not brook much opposition.
I see things day in and day out, things that make me sick inside.
The moment of truth came when Asner disagreed with Landon about how to stage an important scene. He wound up finding Landon surprisingly flexible.
Why can't he let me go?
He wasn't too proud or too egotistical to accept change when he was still able to read the quality in an opposing opinion.
A&E comment, Mark?
Highway to Heaven laid the groundwork for the 90s hit Touched by an Angel. But unlike that show, Landon's message was less about religion and more about just doing the right thing.
Get an ambulance.
He was not a practicing religious man in the sense of having to go to church every weekend or of making a show of being religious. But I think in his relationships with others and in the way he lived his life, I think he was a very religious man.
There, but for the grace of God, go I.
In another episode, Dick Van Dyke starred as a homeless man who was eking out an existence on street corners.
Thank you.
I found his set to be unusual. It was a family. Everybody was relaxed. I've never seen a director more relaxed than Michael. He just enjoyed himself. He obviously loved what he did.
Look, if you want booze or money, I can save you a lot of trouble. I haven't got any.
Van Dyke, of course, was legendary for his talent at comedy. But Michael Landon wrote an episode that showcased his other abilities.
Now, lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, pray the Lord my soul.
It was just easy. It just came. Yeah, Michael had big tears in his eyes. Well, he was a very emotional man. Michael was very emotional and sensitive. I like the way he wrote it. He's not... The whole television industry is so afraid to put any spirituality in a show, any mention of it. I don't know, it's not hip or something. And the character I played, just before he died, said he saw God. Nobody but Michael would have the nerve to do that.
And you know, because you touched the face of God.
And so will you tonight.
Michael knew how to touch people's hearts, and he really did. I'm always taken back to the Frank Capra movies of the 30s and 40s. You walked out of the theater feeling good about yourself. You had a good feeling. And always, it did something for people. And Michael's television shows did that. After you watched them, you kind of felt good about yourself, and life looked a little brighter. And what else is entertainment for but that?
Highway to Heaven was a bona fide hit, but Landon was after something more. He was about to do something everyone else said would never work on television.
I bet you're wondering who I am and what I'm doing here. You're wondering that, aren't you? Well, I've been elected by the birds of Rose Beach to be their spokesman.
After nearly a quarter century on television, Michael Landon definitely knew how to get people's attention.
Because they're dead.
By the mid-'80s, Landon was using his third primetime hit, Highway to Heaven, to campaign for the causes and the people he believed in.
You can only make the kind of show that that you really feel you want to make, that in my case I feel is needed. I think it's important that people think a little bit. If they're not going to at least read, if they're going to sit there and watch this thing until they vegetate, at least let them think a little bit. It might force them to pick up a book.
All right, you kids ready for camp?
One of Highway to Heaven's most memorable stories focused on a summer camp for cancer patients.
Look, I'll make you a deal. You take off your hat and I'll take off my leg. What do you say?
Okay.
Camp is so wonderful. It allows these children to be with a bunch of other kids, first of all, and understand what cancer is. So they get to be regular kids. Nobody gives a damn if you're bald-headed because you've been on chemotherapy, because there's a bunch of bald heads around here.
Make sure you're concentrating on the song and don't look at the camera, because that'll give it away. Gotta pretend that camera's not there. Who I noticed as the camera went by went...
The inspirational story was based on a real-life camp for desperately ill children.
And even louder. Go!
The whole idea was to help kids forget about cancer for a while, and Michael Landon was head cheerleader.
You're not going to find these kids depressing. You may feel a little guilty about what you've been bitching about over the last year or so, but...
I don't think that the stories we did about cancer really, there was no inner thoughts, there was no feeling that, oh, maybe someday I'll be sick or something. I think it was just that he had met a lot of people and had known a lot of people who had been ill with this disease.
Say, may I have 8 hamburgers, please?
Some of the children who appeared in the show were actual cancer patients, and without any fanfare or the usual Hollywood publicity, Michael Landon did something wonderfully unexpected.
He was amazing. He could have left every day, and instead he stayed and had dinner with the kids, and he signed autographs, and he sat around the campfire, and he was just one of the counselors. He was terrific. This went on for a whole week.
As we start down here, loosen to what you have to do to hold the tight.
Disabled children were close to Landon's heart. Another episode of Highway to Heaven focused on the Special Olympics.
Hey, nice jump. They just want to be part of us. They want to be part of this world and given a chance to live like we do. And they can.
All right! Already impossibly rich and internationally famous, Landon raised the bar with which he measured his own success. Now he was focusing on how many people he could help. Landon hired quadriplegic Jim Troche, who wrote and starred in an episode that included one of Landon's personal trademarks, tough love.
What's the matter? You scared?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Tom Sullivan, who was blind since birth, wrote 3 episodes of Highway to Heaven.
You sat me down there on purpose, didn't you?
I didn't think you'd notice.
I told you. Don't try to pull a fast one on a blind guy.
He was willing to stretch the envelope and do it with humor in a way that made us all figure if he thought we were that good, we were.
Hey, that wasn't too bright. Which way you going? I certainly wish I could.
Sullivan never wanted and never got any special treatment from Michael Landon.
You rappelled down that cliff and you can't see? The only way I'd rappel down a sheer face like that. Wouldn't take a chance if I was sighted. It's much too scary.
He kept saying we had to climb up the cliff, and it was real rock climbing. And somebody had said to him, "Do you think we ought to have a stunt guy do this for Tom? Or do you think we ought to get a crane in here and put Tom up there? Or do you whatever they said?" And he said, I'll never forget the line. He said, no, it's great that he's blind because he's the only guy that doesn't have to worry about looking down.
25, take one. Just started.
During the second year of Highway to Heaven, Landon's son, Mike Jr., asked his father for a job. He had no training or experience in production.
I had the opportunity to be an assistant cameraman on his show for 5 years. He was by far the best boss in this business.
Up until that point, Mike Jr. had been adrift. He later admitted dabbling with drugs as a teenager, flunking out of college, and working in a restaurant as a busboy. Whatever difficulties, Mike Sr. let his children make mistakes, but was there when they needed him.
You don't have to teach them to fail. They're going to manage that one. Just teach them not to be afraid of it, because it's not horrendous. It isn't bad. Most people are, I think, injured more by success than they ever are by failure.
Help me, doctor, please!
Part of his past came back to haunt Landon when he decided to resurrect the campy cult film I Was a Teenage Werewolf for a dream sequence he directed on Highway to Heaven.
We're going to dump this wall. Okay. We're going to start here. Well, come on, whose idea do you think it was?
Oh, tell us.
I mean, I was the teenage werewolf. I am now a middle-aged werewolf. Of course it was my idea. Okay, I like some pork and steak tartare, and you guys can go to lunch, too.
Another part of Landon's past was catching up with him. It had been 2 decades since he had played Little Joe Cartwright. Now his son was getting a shot at a Bonanza revival.
He wants to be behind the camera, but all of a sudden he has the opportunity to be in front of the camera, and they're making a new Bonanza series for syndication, and he's going to play my son in that show, which absolutely flips me out. I mean, I think it's fabulous.
But when the second generation failed to recapture the old Bonanza magic, the series rode off into the proverbial sunset. Landon's youngest daughter, Jennifer, always wanted to be an actress, and he cast her in one of his final episodes of Highway to Heaven.
Merry Christmas, great-great-great-grandfather.
She had one line in the show. Her line was, Merry Christmas, great-great-great-great-great-grandfather.
There's a really big saga about how many great-great-greats there was going to be when I said Merry Christmas.
She did the scene. Now, that night, we have a little memo pad on the refrigerator down at the end of the pantry that also has a little recorder on it, so you can push the button in and leave a very short message. She was down, I could hear her talking down there. So she was down at the end of the pantry, and she was saying her line into this little tiny recorder and playing it back. So then she saw me looking at her. I said, honey, what are you doing? She said, Dad, now this is a 5-year-old. Where she gets at, is there any possibility that I could loop that line? She said, I'm doing it much better here in the pantry. I mean, I couldn't believe it.
All he would do was talk about the kids. And he knew exactly what every one of his 9 children were doing. He goes, oh, it's 8 o'clock. Jennifer's in a ballet recital. We ended up going to the market, and he said, did I tell you that my son Mark got a job in the mornings working in the market? That's all he knew about. He knew everything each of his kids were doing. He was just unbelievable when it came to the kids.
I have wonderful children.
He likes it.
I've got my priorities straight. That working is not the most important thing in my life.
Your chick has turned itself and is pipping away at the large end of the egg.
In 1990, Art Carney starred in Landon's last TV movie, Where Pigeons Go to Die.
I tell you what inspired me. 2 words, Michael Landon. When you're connected with something with Michael Landon's name on it, you got a class act.
Landon named a character in the story after his business manager.
I'm Dennis Korn from Jason Realty. Mr. Jason just called me on the car phone. He's stuck at a deposition. He's running a little late.
He wanted to find a tall, dorky-looking guy to play my part, and he kept sending me pictures of the weirdest-looking people, say, this is going to play your part. That was Michael.
Turn on the water.
He believed in people, and at the time, series were shooting for maybe $1.1 million, $1.2 million, somewhere in that range. And Michael, because the crew was so committed, would bring the shows in for maybe $800,000 or whatever it was. Well, his deal was that obviously the money belonged to him. It was paid by the networks and it went to the production companies. What nobody knew was that he was putting that money aside, and whenever there wasn't a Landon series on the air, principal crew people still got paid. I mean, he carried them. He never wanted to lose them.
He took care of the crew. He took care of everybody. I'd be shooting me the last shot of the day, and I'm sitting there on the dolly and feel something inside my pocket. And, of course, go home, get ready to get a shower. Here's that envelope. Now open it up. The check, $5,000, $10,000.
Away from work, Landon enjoyed pushing the envelope.
I guarantee you this helmet's never seen this much air.
He couldn't wait to be buckled into the back seat with the Blue Angels, the Navy's team of precision pilots.
Oh, it was absolutely unbelievable. I mean, it was gorgeous. I mean, you just touch that plane and shoot, it goes.
The Blue Angels managed to bring out the daredevil in Landon, but then again, that wasn't too hard to do.
He was afraid of nothing. He was absolutely fearless. We took off in a helicopter once in Denver, Colorado, to go back to get a plane back to Los Angeles. We'd made some kind of appearance. And the pilot said, whoops, and there's lightning all around us. And sitting in the back seat of the helicopter, I had moments of some worry. And he said, no, over here. I said, what are you, nuts? And the pilot said, oh, we can't go into it. He said, no, I want to get closer to the lightning.
A true thrill seeker, Michael Landon had wound up cheating death many times over. His luck, though, was about to run out.